The morning rush. Grace Bennett wiped down the counter for what felt like the 100th time that morning. The early sunshine streamed through the windows of Riverside Diner, catching the worn edges of the red vinyl booths and illuminating every scratch on the checkerboard floor. She tucked a strand of auburn hair behind her ear and smiled at Mrs. Patterson, the elderly regular who came in every Thursday for blueberry pancakes and black coffee. This was her world. Simple, honest, and real. For 6 years, Grace had worked at this diner, serving breakfast to construction workers, lunch to office employees, and dinner to families who appreciated home-cooked meals at affordable prices. She knew everyone's usual order, remembered their children's names, and listened to their troubles with genuine care. The tips weren't extravagant, but they paid her rent in the small apartment she shared with her younger brother, Danny, who was finishing his final year of community college. Grace had dreams once. She'd been accepted to nursing school, had the paperwork filled out and ready, but when their mother passed away 3 years ago, leaving Danny only 17 and alone, Grace had made a choice. She postponed her dreams, picked up double shifts, and became both sister and guardian. Some people might call it sacrifice. Grace called it love. The bell above the door chimed, and Grace glanced up from refilling the coffee station. A man walked in, and immediately the atmosphere shifted. He wore a suit that probably cost more than Grace made in 6 months. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine, and he carried himself with the kind of confidence that came from never hearing the word no. His dark hair was styled perfectly, and his sharp jawline was set in an expression of mild annoyance. As if the very act of entering this establishment was beneath him, Jonathan Pierce. Grace recognized him from the news. The tech entrepreneur who had built his fortune on innovative software that revolutionized online security. Forbes had recently estimated his net worth at $3.2 billion. And now he stood in Riverside Diner, looking around with barely concealed disdain. The unfortunate encounter. Grace approached him with her notepad and warmest smile. "Good morning. Welcome to Riverside Diner. Just one today." Jonathan glanced at her, his eyes barely registering her presence. "I suppose so, since my assistant failed to make a proper reservation at Marco's. Apparently they're fully booked." He said it as if the universe itself had personally offended him. "Well, you're welcome here." Grace gestured to a booth by the window. "This one has a nice view of the river." He sat down stiffly, immediately pulling out his phone. Grace handed him a menu, but he waved it away without looking up. "Just coffee. Black, strong, and make it quick. I have a conference call in 20 minutes. Coming right up." Grace maintained her smile, though she'd already assessed this customer. Rude, entitled, and treating her like she was invisible. She'd served plenty like him before, though rarely this early in the morning. She returned with the coffee pot and carefully poured him a cup. The diner's coffee wasn't fancy, but it was fresh and strong, brewed every hour. As she set the pot down, Jonathan was gesturing emphatically during his phone call, and his elbow knocked the cup. Hot coffee spilled across the table and onto his expensive suit pants. "What the hell?" He jumped up, glaring at Grace. "Are you incompetent? Look what you've done." Grace felt her cheeks flush. "Sir, I'm so sorry. You knocked it with your elbow, but let me get you some napkins. Don't make excuses." Jonathan's voice rose, drawing attention from other diners. "This suit costs more than you make in a year. Do you have any idea how to do your job properly?" The diner had gone quiet. Grace felt every eye on her, but she kept her composure. "Let me help you clean that up and get you a fresh cup." "A fresh cup?" Jonathan laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Why would I want anything from someone who clearly doesn't understand basic service? Tell me, how much do you make working here? Minimum wage? Is this really the height of your ambition? Serving coffee to people who actually contribute something to society?" The words stung more than Grace wanted to admit. She stood there, napkins in hand, feeling the weight of his judgment. Behind her, she heard a chair scrape. Old Mr. Chen, who ran the corner grocery store, had stood up. "Young man, that's enough," Mr. Chen said firmly, but Jonathan was on a roll now, his frustration from his morning channeling into this moment. "No, really, I'm curious. What made you think this was an acceptable career? No education? No drive? Just content to wipe down tables and pour coffee? It's people like you who expect handouts while people like me actually build things. Create jobs. Move the economy forward. Grace felt something crack inside her. Not in a breaking way, but in the way a door opens. She set down the napkin slowly and looked Jonathan Pierce directly in the eye. The unexpected response right. She said quietly. I do pour coffee. I wipe down tables. I make $8 an hour plus tips. And you know what else I do? Jonathan blinked, surprised she was talking back. I remember that Mrs. Patterson over there just lost her husband of 50 years. So I always make sure her pancakes have extra blueberries, because they were his favorite and it makes her smile. I know that Tom, our cook, is a veteran with PTSD who can't work in high-stress environments. So this diner gave him a chance when no one else would. I know that the teenager who busses tables is saving every penny for college because his parents can't help him. Grace's voice remained calm, but it carried through the silent diner. She took a breath. 3 years ago, my mom died of cancer. She didn't have insurance because she was self-employed, and the treatments bankrupted her before they failed her. I had a scholarship to nursing school, Mr. Pierce. Full ride. But my little brother was 17 and someone had to raise him. Someone had to keep a roof over his head and food on his table. So yes, I pour coffee. And I'm not ashamed of it. Jonathan's face had gone pale. You asked about ambition? Grace continued, her voice gentle now, not angry. My ambition is to make sure Danny graduates college without the debt that would crush him. My ambition is to treat every person who walks through that door with dignity. Whether they're a billionaire or someone counting quarters to afford breakfast. My ambition is to live in a way that would make my mom proud. She picked up the coffee pot. So you're right. I don't build tech companies or make billions of dollars. But I do build something. I build relationships. I build community. I build a life that means something beyond a bank balance. And honestly, sir, I think that's worth more than any suit you're wearing. The diner erupted in applause. Mrs. Patterson was wiping her eyes. Mr. Chen was nodding approvingly. Even the businessman in the corner booth who'd been buried in his laptop was clapping. Jonathan Pierce stood there, coffee stains on his $1,000 pants, and for the first time in years he felt truly seen. Not as a billionaire, not as a success story, but as a man who had just been taught a lesson in humanity by a waitress he'd tried to humiliate. Grace turned to walk away, but Jonathan's voice stopped her. Wait. She turned back, and he saw something in her eyes he hadn't noticed before. Intelligence, strength, grace under pressure, kindness despite his cruelty. All the things his world of boardrooms and bottom lines had somehow made him forget to value. You're right, he said quietly. I'm sorry. That was completely out of line. I had no right to speak to you that way. Grace studied him for a moment, then nodded. Apology accepted. Would you still like that fresh cup of coffee? Yes, please. And he sat back down, this time really seeing the diner around him. The warmth, the community, the connections. Everything his penthouse office, with its skyline view, couldn't provide. As Grace poured his coffee, something shifted in the morning light. Neither of them knew it yet, but this moment, this collision of worlds, was the beginning of something that would change both their lives forever. Because sometimes the universe puts exactly the right people in front of us, even if we're too blind to recognize them at first. An unexpected return. 3 days passed before Jonathan Pierce walked through the doors of Riverside Diner again. This time he wore jeans and a simple button-down shirt, looking almost like a different person. Grace was refilling ketchup bottles at the counter when she noticed him. And for a moment, their eyes met across the room. He chose the same booth by the window. But this time he waited patiently. Hands folded on the table, phone tucked away in his pocket, Grace approached with her notepad, professional but cautious. Good morning. Coffee, please. And Grace, I owe you more than an apology. Jonathan's voice was different now, quieter, without the sharp edges of entitlement. I've been thinking about what you said, about what really matters. I'd like to understand better if you're willing to talk with me. Grace poured his coffee, studying his face. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something that looked like genuine curiosity. I have a break in 30 minutes. I can sit with you then, if you're serious about this. I'm serious. More serious than I've been about anything in a long time. Those 30 minutes felt like hours too, Jonathan. He watched Grace work, really watched her this time. She greeted an elderly man with mobility issues and helped him to his seat without making him feel helpless. She patiently explained the menu to a young mother whose toddler was having a meltdown, even offering to bring the child's food first. She laughed with the regulars, remembered details about their lives, created moments of joy in the middle of ordinary mornings. This wasn't just a job to her. It was a calling, performed with excellence and heart, the conversation that changed. Everything when Grace finally slid into the booth across from him, carrying 2 slices of apple pie. Jonathan found himself nervous in a way he hadn't felt since his first investor pitch 15 years ago. "Pie's on me," Grace said, pushing a plate toward him. "Best in Portland." And that's not just diner loyalty talking. Jonathan took a bite and was genuinely surprised by how good it was. "Thank you. For the pie, and for giving me a chance I probably don't deserve." Grace studied him over her own fork. "Why did you come back, Mr. Pierce?" "Jonathan. Please, just call me Jonathan." He set down his fork. "I came back because you were right about everything. I've spent the last 15 years building a company, making money, being told I'm brilliant and successful. But somewhere along the way, I forgot how to be human. I forgot that the people serving my coffee, cleaning my office, driving my car, they're not invisible. They're not less than. They're just people living their lives with the same hopes and fears I have." Grace listened without interrupting. Something Jonathan realized was rare in his world. Everyone always wanted to jump in, to impress him, to pitch him something. "I went home after that first morning, and I couldn't stop thinking about what you said. About your mother, your brother, your choices." Jonathan's voice softened. "My mother died when I was young too. Cancer, like yours. But my father had money, had insurance, had every advantage, and I never had to sacrifice anything. I went to the best schools, had every opportunity handed to me. I never had to choose between my dreams and my family because I could have both." "So you feel guilty?" Grace said gently. "No, well maybe. But more than that, I feel like I've been living in a bubble." Jonathan leaned forward, his green eyes intense. "I surround myself with people who tell me I'm changing the world with software and algorithms. But you, Grace, you actually change people's days, their lives, with simple kindness. And I want to understand how you do that. How you stay compassionate when life has been hard. How you find meaning in work that society says isn't important." Grace was quiet for a moment, tracing patterns in the condensation on her water glass. "It's not complicated, Jonathan. I just remembered that everyone has a story. Mrs. Patterson lost her husband. Tom fought in a war that changed him. That teenager bussing tables is terrified he won't make it to college. Everyone who walks through that door is fighting some kind of battle I know nothing about. So the least I can do is be kind, the education of a billionaire, over the following weeks." Jonathan became a regular at Riverside Diner. At first, other customers whispered, recognizing the famous billionaire who kept showing up at their neighborhood spot. But eventually his presence became normal, expected, welcomed. He didn't just observe anymore. He asked questions, listened to stories, learned names. He discovered that Mr. Chen had immigrated from Taiwan 40 years ago with nothing but determination and had built his grocery store from scratch. He learned that the construction workers who came in at dawn were building affordable housing, taking pride in creating homes for families. He met teachers spending their own money on classroom supplies, nurses working double shifts to cover staff shortages, mechanics keeping old cars running because their customers couldn't afford new ones. Each person taught him something his Ivy League education never had, that wealth isn't measured only in dollars, that success isn't always about climbing higher, that dignity exists in every honest job done well. Grace watched his transformation with cautious hope. She saw him laugh genuinely at Tom's terrible jokes. She noticed him helping Mrs. Patterson with her coat, without being asked. She observed him listening, truly listening. When the single mother talked about her struggles with childcare costs, but she also kept her guard up. She'd seen wealthy people slum it before, playing at poverty tourism before returning to their comfortable lives. She wouldn't let herself believe this was different until time proved it. The moment of truth. 6 weeks after their first encounter, Jonathan arrived at the diner late one evening, just before closing. Grace was wiping down tables, her movements showing the fatigue of a long shift. Only Tom remained in the kitchen, starting his cleaning routine. "Grace, can we talk?" Jonathan asked, and something in his voice made her look up sharply. They sat in their usual booth, the one that had become somehow theirs through repetition and ritual. "I need your advice," Jonathan said, pulling out his phone and showing her an email. "My board wants me to automate our customer service division. It would save the company $40 million a year. The AI system I developed could handle 90% of customer inquiries without human intervention." Grace read the email, her heart sinking as she understood the implications. How many people would lose their jobs? 850. Jonathan's voice was tight. Mostly single mothers, people without college degrees, folks who need these jobs to survive. The board says it's the smart business decision, that staying competitive requires efficiency, that these jobs are always going to be obsolete eventually. What do you think? Grace asked quietly. 2 months ago, I would have approved it without hesitation. Numbers are numbers. Progress is progress. Jonathan looked at her, and she saw genuine anguish in his eyes. But now I keep thinking about the stories these people would tell. The kids who need braces, the rent that's due, the elderly parents depending on their support. I keep thinking about your mother, about what it means when people lose access to health care. And I don't know how to reconcile being a good businessman with being a good person. Grace took a deep breath. "Can I tell you about my dad?" Jonathan nodded, surprised. She rarely mentioned her father. He worked in manufacturing. Plant closed when I was 15, moved operations overseas to save money. Dad spent 2 years looking for work, taking jobs that paid half what he'd made before. He started drinking, sank into depression, and eventually he just left. Mom said the shame of not providing broke something in him. Grace's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "So when you ask me about those 850 jobs, I don't see a line item on a spreadsheet. One see 850 fathers, mothers, sons, daughters. I see families, so you think I shouldn't do it? I think you should find another way." Grace reached across the table, her hand hovering near his. "You're brilliant, Jonathan. Everyone says so. Can't you use that brilliance to figure out how to stay competitive without destroying lives? Can't you innovate in a way that lifts people up instead of casting them aside?" Jonathan looked at her hand, so close to his, and felt something shift in his chest. This woman, who had every reason to be bitter about life's unfairness, still believed in compassion over convenience, still chose people over profit, still had faith that doing the right thing was possible. "You're right," he said softly. "You're absolutely right. I'll figure out another way." Their hands finally touched, and neither pulled away. The vulnerability of success as fall turned toward winter. Their relationship deepened in ways neither had anticipated. Jonathan found himself sharing things he'd never told anyone. About the loneliness of success, the way people treated him like a bank account instead of a person. About the pressure of being responsible for thousands of employees and billions in shareholder value. About the fear that he'd built an empire but lost his soul somewhere in the process. Grace shared her own fears. That Danny would graduate and realize how much she'd sacrificed and feel guilty instead of grateful. That she'd wake up at 40 still pouring coffee, her nursing dreams permanently deferred. That she'd become so used to putting others first that she'd forgotten how to want things for herself. One evening, after the diner closed, they sat together in the empty restaurant. Jonathan had stayed to help Grace clean up, something that had become their routine. He was better at mopping than she'd expected, though his technique was still amateurish. "I need to tell you something," Jonathan said, setting aside the mop. I'm falling in love with you, Grace. And I know that sounds crazy because we're from completely different worlds. And maybe you think I'm just some rich guy who'll get bored and move on. But I've never met anyone like you. You make me want to be better. You make me remember why any of this matters. Grace felt her heart racing. She'd been fighting her own feelings for weeks, telling herself it was foolish to fall for someone so far outside her orbit. But the truth was undeniable. I'm scared, she admitted. Not of you, but of this. What happens when you realize that dating a waitress is complicated? When your friends ask why you're with someone who didn't finish college? When the novelty wears off and you remember that we live in different universes? Jonathan moved closer, taking her hands in his. Then I'll remind myself every day why you're the most extraordinary person I've ever met. I'll remember that you taught me more about life in 2 months than I learned in 4 years at Stanford. I'll know that the woman who chose her brother's future over her own dreams has more courage than any CEO I've ever met. But your world, Grace whispered, can become our world, Jonathan said. If you'll let me try. I'm not asking you to change who you are, Grace. I'm asking if you'll let me become more like you. The kiss, when it finally came, tasted like coffee and possibility. The reality of 2 worlds colliding. The news broke 3 weeks later. A tech blogger spotted Jonathan and Grace having dinner at a small Italian restaurant in Grace's neighborhood. And by morning, the story was everywhere. Billionaire Jonathan Pierce dating diner waitress. Tech moguls, surprising romance. From boardroom to booth, Pierce's new love interest. Grace's phone exploded with calls from reporters, former classmates she hadn't spoken to in years, and strangers offering to sell her story. The diner was flooded with curious onlookers and photographers. Her private life became public entertainment overnight. Jonathan called an emergency meeting with his PR team, but their advice was unanimous and brutal. End it quietly. Spin it as a brief friendship. Move on to someone more appropriate for his public image. His board members expressed concern about his judgment. His investors questioned his focus. Even his closest business associates suggested that perhaps he was having some kind of crisis. Grace faced her own pressures. Customers at the diner treated her differently now, some with envy, others with judgment. She overheard whispers that she was using Jonathan for his money, that she'd seduced a billionaire to escape her station. Former friends from high school reached out, suddenly interested in reconnecting. The authenticity of every interaction became suspect. Danny was the only one who saw clearly. "Sis, do you love him?" he asked one evening in their apartment. Grace looked at her younger brother, now 20 and wise beyond his years. "Yes, I really do." "Then forget everyone else. You taught me that the only opinion that matters is the one you can live with when you look in the mirror." Danny hugged her. "Be happy, Grace. You've earned it." The ultimate test of the crisis came on a cold December morning. Jonathan's father, Richard Pierce, flew in from New York specifically to meet Grace. The breakfast meeting was arranged at a 5-star hotel restaurant. Deliberate territory meant to intimidate. Grace wore her best dress, a simple navy blue one she'd bought for her mother's funeral and hadn't worn since. She felt out of place among the crystal and fine china. But she held her head high. Richard Pierce was everything Jonathan might become without compassion. Polished, powerful, and coldly calculating. He barely looked at Grace as they sat down. "Miss Bennett, let me be direct." Richard's voice was smooth but sharp. "My son is going through a phase, seeking authenticity in a world he perceives as fake. You represent something novel to him. But this will pass, and when it does, you'll be left with nothing but tabloid infamy and a broken heart." Grace felt Jonathan tense beside her, but she placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Let me respond," she said quietly. She turned to Richard with calm dignity. "Mr. Pierce, you're right that your son and I come from different backgrounds. I don't have money or connections or a prestigious education. What I do have is integrity, compassion, and genuine love for Jonathan. Not for his bank account or his last name, but for the man he is and the man he's becoming." Richard's expression didn't change. "Pretty speech. But love doesn't pay bills, Miss Bennett." "What happens when you realize you can't keep up with his lifestyle?" When you're expected to attend galas and charity functions with people who'll judge every word you say? When you have children and they're mocked at school for having a mother who was a waitress? The words were designed to wound, and they found their mark. Grace felt old, insecurities rising, all the doubts she'd been fighting. But then Jonathan stood up abruptly. "Dad, that's enough." Richard looked at his son with surprise. Jonathan never defied him. "Grace is the best person I've ever known." Jonathan's voice was steady but firm. "She's taught me more about being human than you ever did. And if you can't respect her, then you don't respect me or the man I'm trying to become. Don't be foolish, Jonathan. Think about the company, your reputation, your future." "I am thinking about my future." Jonathan looked at Grace with such tenderness that her breath caught. "And I know who I want in it." Richard Pierce stood, straightening his tie. "You're making a mistake. When this falls apart, don't come crying to me." After he left, Jonathan sat back down, taking Grace's trembling hands. "I'm sorry. I should have warned you he'd be like that." Grace shook her head, tears streaming down her face, but not from sadness. "Jonathan, you just stood up to your father for me. You chose me over his approval. I'll choose you every time. Grace. Every single time." Building something new, the months that followed weren't easy. Jonathan faced resistance from his business circle, lost a few investors who disapproved of his relationship, and weathered endless speculation in the press. But he also made changes that mattered. He rejected the automation plan for customer service. Instead, investing in training programs that allowed those employees to move into higher-skilled positions. He started a foundation focused on supporting community college students, inspired by Danny's journey. He began speaking publicly about the dignity of all work and the importance of treating service industry workers with respect. Grace finished her associate degree through night classes. Supported by Jonathan, but driven by her own determination. She continued working at the diner part-time, refusing to abandon the place and people that had shaped her. She used her unexpected platform to advocate for living wages and healthcare access. Turning tabloid attention into social impact, Danny graduated with honors, landing a job as a civil engineer. At his graduation, he thanked Grace publicly, calling her the best parent he could have asked for. There wasn't a dry eye in the audience. 1 year after their first encounter, Jonathan and Grace returned to Riverside Diner. The staff had decorated it with white lights and flowers. All the regulars were there, dressed in their best. Grinning with anticipation, Jonathan knelt down in the same booth where Grace had taught him his first lesson about humanity. "Grace Bennett, you changed my life the moment you refused to let me diminish you. You taught me that real wealth is measured in relationships, that true success is lifting others up, and that love is found in the most unexpected places." He pulled out a simple platinum band with a single diamond. Not the largest or flashiest, but chosen with thought and care. "Will you marry me?" Grace looked at the man who had transformed from an arrogant billionaire into someone who understood what truly mattered. She looked around at the community that had supported her through everything. She thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. "Yes," she said, pulling him up and into her arms. "Yes, yes, yes." The diner erupted in cheers. Mrs. Patterson cried happy tears. Mr. Chen beamed with pride. Tom rang the bell from the kitchen. And in that moment, surrounded by love and community, Grace and Jonathan proved that the greatest wealth isn't found in bank accounts or stock portfolios. It's found in choosing each other. In building bridges across divides, in refusing to let the world tell you who you can love or what your life should look like. The forever after their wedding was held in a botanical garden. The guests ranging from tech billionaires to line cooks, from venture capitalists to teachers. Jonathan's father didn't attend, but Richard sent a brief letter months later, acknowledging he'd been wrong. It wasn't a full reconciliation, but it was a start. Grace opened a nonprofit that provided scholarships and career counseling for service industry workers looking to change careers. Jonathan scaled back his role at his company, focusing on ethical business practices and employee welfare. Together, they created a foundation that funded community colleges, health clinics in underserved areas, programs supporting families caring for sick relatives. They bought a modest house in Grace's neighborhood. Refusing the mansion Jonathan's friends insisted they needed. They had Sunday dinners at Riverside Diner, where Grace still helped out during busy shifts. They built a life that honored both their worlds, taking the best from each and discarding what didn't serve them. 5 years later, Grace gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl. They named the girl Hope, after Grace's mother. The boy they named Tom, after the veteran cook who'd stood up for Grace that first terrible morning on quiet evenings. After the twins were asleep, Jonathan and Grace would sit on their porch and reflect on the journey that brought them together. From that first disastrous encounter to building a life, neither could have imagined. She'd never known love until the billionaire showed her what it really means. But the truth was deeper than that simple headline. They had shown each other what love means. Real love, built on mutual respect, shared values, and the courage to bridge any divide. Because in the end, the waitress taught the billionaire that true wealth is found in kindness, community, and connection. And the billionaire taught the waitress that she deserved to dream big, to be cherished, to take up space in any room she entered. Together, they proved that when two people choose each other despite what the world says, when they build on a foundation of genuine respect and love, there's no gulf too wide to cross. No difference too great to overcome. Their love story wasn't about a poor girl being rescued by a rich man. It was about two people who met at exactly the right moment to teach each other what they most needed to learn. That money without meaning is empty. That struggle without hope is crushing. But that together, combining compassion with resources, humility with confidence, and love with action, anything becomes possible. Grace never forgot where she came from. Jonathan never stopped learning from where she'd been. And in that balance, they found something more valuable than all the billions in the world. They found home. They found purpose. They found each other, and they lived not in a fairy tale, but in a real, messy, beautiful life built on the radical belief that love transcends every boundary we create, if only we're brave enough to let it.